If you've watched my last video on the subject, you know that Theater of the Mind is both very convenient and has a lot of potential for immersion. But it can be a bit tricky to use, and mastering it takes both time and effort. So let me give you a few tips on how to master Theater of the Mind. Let's start with combat, since this is the situation where most people use miniatures or battle maps rather than relying on Theater of the Mind. As I explained in my last video, it is not necessarily a bad thing if the players don't know everything that is going on, but you as a GM need to keep track of everything that is going on and have an overview of the situation. To help with that, first I recommend limiting the number of combatants, starting with limiting the number of players to anything you feel comfortable with. My personal limit is 5 players, but I feel more comfortable with 3 or 4. Also, don't give your PCs too many combat-capable allies like mercenaries or pets you would also have to keep track of. It's okay to give them non-combatant allies like a pack mule or healers that are tagging along. They can just go and hide during combat, so you don't have to keep track of them. Often it is not hard to limit the number of enemies the party has to fight. If you've got the monster of the week or the big evil bad guy with his minions, it's easy enough to limit the number of enemies to 3 to 5. But sometimes you want a large number of enemies, like a goblin horde or an undead army attacking the players. And in that case, you have to use a few tricks to keep track of the combat situation. So, only use one type of monster, so you don't have to keep track of different stat blocks. Put the monsters into groups that move and attack as one, so you've got less individuals to keep track of. Now, instead of hit points, only keep track of the number of enemies in a group. That is also the number of attacks that the group has. When one of the members of the group is hit, just eliminate it when the attack does a significant amount of damage, like 1 for a goblin or 5 for a tougher enemy. If the attack deals damage below that threshold, just don't bother with it. If the group is hit by an area of effect spell, just eliminate the whole group. Or if it is a weak spell that does not a lot of damage, then lower the damage threshold for the group as a whole, so they are easier to take down with following attacks. The most important thing here is to have the monsters move and attack as one, so you can handle them like a single monster. This way, even a battle against 100 rats becomes manageable. Now, you should simplify the combat area. That does not mean that the area itself has to be simple and boring, but you have to abstract it to make it easier to handle. So take a page from Professor Dungeon Master and divide your combat area into 3 areas. Close combat, ranged combat, and out of combat. Close combat is everything you can reach and attack with a melee weapon in a single round. In D&D, this is an area of about 30 foot, like 1 room in a dungeon. Ranged combat is everything that is close enough to shoot a ranged weapon or cast a ranged spell into the melee combat, but too far away to be reached and hit in a single round. Like the corridor of a dungeon room or the next dungeon room over, or the tree line of a forest clearing where the battle happens. It takes an entire round of movement to go from melee combat to the guys shooting at you, or for the guys shooting at you to engage you in melee combat. Finally, out of combat is anything that is too far away to affect the combat, but still close enough to hear it, like 2 dungeon rooms over, or the forest adjacent to the clearing where the battle happens. This range is only interesting if you want to flee combat or if you want to bring in reinforcements, both friendly and hostile. It takes 1 whole round of movement to get from out of combat into ranged combat, and then from ranged combat into the melee combat. So 2 rounds of movement in total, but you can adjust the time it takes to whatever you need. Have the Bandit King's men show up 1d4 rounds after the beginning of combat and the first cries of battle interrupt their game of cards. So now you only have 3 zones of combat to keep track of instead of a whole battle grid. But what about flanking and advantage? It's easy enough in 5e. The group with the bigger number can usually move into a flanking position in melee combat within their movement speed. But I propose to use another of the professor's house rules: cinematic advantage. Cinematic advantage means that the combatants have to do something cool in order to gain advantage rather than just flanking, like splashing a tankard of ale into the bandit's face, or swinging from a chandelier, or rolling a bunch of barrels down some stairs. Just have your players describe what they want to do, then let them roll an appropriate skill check, or maybe have them just succeed, and then they can attack with advantage. Encourage your players to use the environment to gain advantage. Describe a few choice objects when you're setting the scene they could use, like a steam cauldron or a chandelier they could swing from. Also, be open for your players to use and describe things that you didn't include in the initial description, but that are likely available, like tankards of ale in a tavern, a fallen tree in a forest, or dirt and bones on a dungeon floor. All of this might be less tactical than careful positioning on a battle map, but it's way more cinematic and it's fun. Last but not least, use group initiative rather than individual initiative. That makes it way easier to keep track of things. Now, with these tricks, you as a GM have an overview of the combat situation, but your players might still be lost in the chaos of combat. And while they don't need to keep track of everything like the GM does, they do need to know what is right in front of them so they can act. To remedy this, I briefly tell my players what enemies are in front of them, which allies that might need help are near them when it's their turn to act. Just briefly describe it to them. Like, Ingolf, the Orc War Chief, is right in front of you, flanked by 2 of its guards. To your left, Warnhild has just collapsed, bleeding on the floor. What do you want to do? Or if the PC is in ranged combat, it would be something like, Elidir, you see your allies are still engaged in melee combat with the Orc War Chief and his guards. Warnhild has just fallen to the ground. You can hear enemy reinforcements coming from the forest. They will be here in the next round. What do you want to do? To end this video, let me give you a brief example of combat using all the methods I just explained. So, typical combat situation. Ingolf, Varnhild, and Elidir are attacking a necromancer in his lair. So I begin by setting the scene, something like: you enter the lair of the necromancer king. He is sitting on a bone throne on a raised dais in the back. His skeletal frame clad in rotting robes. 10 of his undying guards are in front of him, with rusty chainmail and old but still deadly weapons in hands. The room is drenched in a green eldritch twilight by green burning braziers to either side of the room. The air is thick with scented oils that do little to hide the smell of rot and decay. What do you want to do? As we go, we'll try to sneak up and get past the guards. And then they will roll, and let's say they fail because there are a lot of guards and the enemy is expecting them. So the guards spot you, roll initiative, and then it's either the players or the necromancer and his minions going first. And I divide my battlefield into close, ranged, and out of combat. Ingolf and Varnhild will run into close combat with the undying guards of the necromancer, and I'll just take them into 2 groups of 5, and they will be in the melee, and I'll have Elidir and the necromancer king in ranged combat. First round of combat, players win initiative. Ingolf, the guards are standing between you and the necromancer king. What do you want to do? And he says, I'll try to hack my way through the guards. And alright. Roll an attack, and he does like 10 damage, and the guards are tough, but this will take them out. So only 4 guards. 1 hit will do the same. Only 4 guards. Elidir will maybe shoot into the melee, manage to hit 1 of the guards as well. And then the Necromancer King will cast a spell. As I describe, the Necromancer King raises his orbed staff at you, Varnhild. Make a saving throw. Let's say Varnhild fails and now she is stunned. Next round of combat. Ingolf, you still have 4 guards before you, but you see to your right that Varnhild is held in place by some kind of spell. 3 guards still in front of her. What do you want to do? And Ingolf's player will go something like, oh, that's bad, I have to help her. I run over and I try to throw over one of those green braziers, trying to create a flaming barrier between Varnhild, me, and the undead guards. They say, alright, why not? Go and roll a strength check. Ingolf is a beefy guy, so he manages the strength check, critical success. And I tell him, you run over to the brazier, your muscles bulge as you throw it over, and they spill a green burning liquid onto the undead that are rushing behind you, and you manage to take 3 of them out. They burn to the bones and collapse on the floor. And I can be generous with them taking out this already damaged group of undead. There's always more undead where those came from. So then it's Elidir's turn. Varnhild's still stunned. You see your allies are pushed into a corner of the room with greening fire between them and the waiting undying guards. The Necromancer King is laughing on his throne. What do you want to do? He goes like, I have to stop this spell. I want to shoot at the Necromancer King. Tell him, you can do that, but you've got disadvantage. There's undead between you and him. So he will go, that's bad, I have to hit this guy. Can I maybe climb up one of the rotting wall hangings to try to get elevation for the shot? And go like, well, yeah, okay. I didn't describe some rotting wall hangings, but in the lair of the Necromancer King, it's likely there are rotting wall hangings. So go ahead, roll a dexterity check, see if you can climb up. Elidir succeeds, so now he has cinematic advantage, but that only negates the cover. So Elidir rolls a normal attack roll, and he rolls maybe 10 damage on the Necromancer King. Now it's the Necromancer King's turn. The Necromancer King sees that most of its guards are gone and he's hit and he's got an arrow stuck in his chest. He suddenly jumps off his throne and runs through a hidden door behind it. So now he's out of combat. Just put him over there. And his remaining guards disengage from the melee. And try to shield him from pursuit. What do you want to do next combat round? And like this, we have a boss encounter with a Necromancer, Spellcaster and 10 guards, and we can keep track of it, no problem. That's all I've got for today. So, what are your favorite tricks to manage combat? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching and fight on!